Good evening. If I get everyone, please take a seat who hasn't sat down yet, please. Thank you. My name is Jeremiah Poff. I am the president of the Young Americans for Freedom here at Franciscan University of Steubenville. I would like to welcome you all today to this event, especially our visitors and those joining us via the Daily Wire live stream on Al Gore's amazing internet. It is my honor today to introduce Mr. Michael J. Knowles as he kicks off his Covfefe on Campus tour here at Franciscan University. Playing second fiddle to his boss, Ben Shapiro, Michael J. Knowles is a political commentator for the Daily Wire, where since 2017 he has hosted the daily podcast, The Michael Knowles Show. In 2017, he wrote the #1 national best-selling, mostly blank treatise, Reasons to Vote for Democrats, A Comprehensive Guide, which President Donald Trump hailed as a great book for your reading enjoyment. As of earlier this month, it is considered to be the only political book that is self-updating. Before blank book fame, Michael studied history and Italian literature at Yale University, graduating with honors and earning the Seymour L. Lutzman Prize for outstanding contribution to artistic and cultural life of the college. While at Yale, Michael rendered the first ever translation for the English stage of Florentine diplomat and political philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli's semi-autobiographical play, The Girl from Andros, which Machiavelli scholar Angelo Capodivaca hailed as a watershed event for the English-speaking world. In 2011, Michael co-founded Red Pillar Consulting, in which capacity he has advised political campaigns from the municipal to the presidential level. Michael has performed in theater, television, and cinema, recently starting in the feature-length comedy film Holly Weird. In 2017, he teamed up with his Daily Wire counterpart, acclaimed novelist and screenwriter Andrew Klavan, to perform the 13-episode narrative podcast, Another Kingdom, which garnered nearly 2,000 five-star reviews by the release of its final installment, rising to become one of the most popular arts podcasts of the year. Michael's work focuses on the relation between culture and politics, as goes the eternal maxim, politics is show business for ugly people. Please join me in welcoming Michael Knowles.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that warm introduction. Thank you to Franciscan University of Steubenville for having me. Thank you to YAF. This officially marks the kickoff of my Covfefe on Campus tour. I am so pleased to be launching it here with you because I am on a mission. I am a man on a mission to spread Covfefe on college campuses from coast to coast. It's very important. The question you might ask is, what is Covfefe? I wish I could tell you. Covfefe is a little bit like pornography in that you can't define it, but you know it when you see it. Covfefe is ineffable. Covfefe, if I had to describe it, I would describe it as speaking to that relaxed, funny exuberance that conservatives seem to be enjoying right now, the devil may care sort of attitude, the simple joys of being right, which is our topic tonight. And I'm on this mission to college students because they need a little joy, they need a little levity, they need a little Covfefe, don't they? They look, now not you all are very smart, you're serious people. I go to some of these universities, oh my gosh, they've whipped themselves into an hysterical frenzy on campuses, from that girl that they call Trigglypuff at UMass Amherst, to the shrieking girl at my own alma mater at Yale, where just this week at the law school, they had to cancel classes because the students were triggered by Brett Kavanaugh's nomination. They canceled classes there. The future shark litigators of America were traumatized by the nomination of a milquetoast federal judge to the Supreme Court. Something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. And it's not just on campuses. Beyond the campuses, conservatives are having a much better time than lefties these days. Why is this? The left has whipped itself into a perpetual scowl. They whine and they moan and they scream and they shriek and they wear the simulacra of genitalia on their heads. Something bizarre has happened. But we, conservatives, are having a grand old time. Now, why is that? Why are we having such a good time? Is it because President Trump has ushered in the most effective, strongest era of conservative governance, certainly in my lifetime? Is it because we're all richer, thanks to tax reform and deregulation? Is it because we're safer now? Because we have a sane foreign policy where we reward our allies and we punish our enemies? Is it simply because we're all slap-happy watching the tweeter-in-chief hilariously deal blow after blow to our ideological opponents? Yeah, maybe. Maybe. It could be. Those things are great. I do not deny that whatever. However, the issue runs deeper. Conservatives are happier than leftists. They are more content than leftists. They find greater joy in life. And don't take my word for it. This has been demonstrated again and again in social scientific studies. Just this year out of USC, there was a meta-analysis that looked at 5 studies, almost 20,000 people in 16 countries from the 1980s all the way up to 2017. It found that conservatives are happier, more satisfied, and find greater purpose in life. Now, what kind of conservatives are we talking about? Are we talking about, Jeff Flake? Or are we talking about those nominal Republicans who spend all of their time attacking other Republicans? They never spend any time attacking Democrats. Those squishy, vishy, fraudulent conservatives who don't actually advance a conservative agenda. People like Ana Navarro or Jennifer Rubin, who play conservatives on television, but rarely, if ever, work on conservative campaigns in the real world. No, we're not talking about them. It turns out, according to the studies, that the squishes are not the happiest. The moderates are not the happiest. If you stand in the middle of the road, you are going to get hit by a truck, which will not make you happy. The studies show that the more conservative you are, the happier you will be. And this is very good news for somebody like me, whose politics are slightly to the right of Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun. I can attest to it personally. There is a study that came out from Pew Research in 2006. It showed that conservative Republicans are 68% more likely to call themselves very happy than liberal Democrats. It's looking toward the extremes. It turns out that people who call themselves extreme conservatives are the happiest of all. So why are we so happy? Well, let's start with religion. We're at Franciscan University. That seems like a good place to start. And of course, religion forms the basis of our identities. Andrew Breitbart, a wonderful Hollywood conservative, was fond of saying that politics is downstream of culture, and culture, of course, is downstream of the cult. It's downstream of religion. It comes from what we worship. The words culture and cult are related. They derive from the same word. What a culture worships will define that culture. If a culture worships money, it's going to be more materialistic. If a culture worships sex, it's going to be more licentious. If a culture worships God, it's going to be godlier. We know that conservatives are more religious than leftists, traditionally religious, because the left has, yoga and veganism or whatever they do, environmentalism, I don't know. But I'm talking about traditional religion, Christianity specifically. Religious conservatives outnumber religious liberals 4-1. You don't need to look at a study to know this. Just a few years ago at the 2012 Democrat National Convention, they literally booed God. They booed God. The chairman of the convention came out. They said, okay, we're going to put God back in the platform. And they said, boo, boo, give us Barabbas, boo. They didn't say that. But they might as well have said that. They might as well have. Religious people are twice as likely as irreligious people to call themselves very happy. This, of course, makes sense. If you think that God loves you, that you will live forever with God in eternity, you are probably going to be happier, you're probably going to have a better time in life than if you believe that when you die, you take a dirt nap, you turn to worm food, all of life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That will not make you smile. I mean, that's not a great making for a day. Conservatives also, therefore, take part in behaviors that are traditionally associated with religion, namely getting married and staying married. And marriage makes people happier. Some people might not always feel this way, but it's true. Marriage does, in the long haul, according to all of these studies, make people happier. And the Institute for Family Studies in 2015 found out that conservatives are more likely to get married and to stay married. Controlling for economics, children who live in red states are more likely to grow up in a home with their 2 biological parents than children in blue states. And the General Social Survey shows that Republicans are more happily married and more likely to remain in their first marriage. It's at this point that I should tell you, I don't actually put a lot of stock in social scientific studies. I know I've rattled off about 20 of them to you, but I'm happy to cite them when they suit my purposes. But I don't put a lot of stock into them because they can be manipulated, they can be politicized, especially by the left. Fortunately, though, we can talk about the simple joys of being right in qualitative terms as well, not only in quantitative terms. So I can speak from personal experience on both of those two issues. By the time of my confirmation when I was 13, I basically became an atheist, agnostic atheist. I remained that way for about 10 years. I reverted with the zeal of a revert in 2013, right after college. And I also just got married in June to my long-suffering fiancée, sweet little Elisa. And thank you, it's very kind. And I can tell you my life has greatly improved. Her life has deteriorated dramatically, but my life is way better. So that doesn't tell the whole story. Religion and marriage do not tell the whole story because there are many different types of conservatives. There's the religious right, but there are also traditionalists, libertarians, neoconservatives, the populist types. There are a lot of different conservatives. There's a great diversity of thought on the right. This is one of the great advantages of the right over the left. The left has no diversity of thought. At one point it did, but it ran out its last blue dog Democrat decades ago. There's only progressivism now, marching ever more toward progressivism. More on that later. So sure, religion plays a role, but we're not here only to discuss religion. We are here more broadly to discuss the simple joys of being right. I am here to proselytize. You've already been evangelized. Now I'm here to proselytize for conservative thought. Because there are many simple joys of being right. I have identified 7. I could go on for hours and hours, so I'll limit it to 7. Namely, laughing, listening, looking, learning, loving, letting the world be as it is, and consequently, limiting our demands on life. That's a lot of L's. I got that from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis famously argued for Christianity with 3 L's. I am not C.S. Lewis. I need 7 L's. I probably need 20 L's, but I'll stick to 7. The first one is the most obvious, which is laughing. Listen, I'm older than you. You probably don't remember this. In the old days, though, the left used to laugh. In the old days. Comedians on TV, they did. This is a true story. In the old days, like take Jimmy Kimmel, for example. So he had what was called a late-night comedy show, where he would get on stage, and he would tell jokes. And then, what would happen? The audience would laugh at the jokes. I know this is a foreign concept, because now Jimmy Kimmel gets on stage, and he cries. Night after night, he cries. And then, when Jimmy Kimmel, he cries and he does his thing, then the audience does just what you just did. They applaud. They say, oh, wow, Jimmy, wow, they applaud. Claps, not laughs, as my friend Owen Benjamin says. Claps, not laughs. Kathy Griffin, same thing. Kathy Griffin says mean things to me on Twitter, which is why I'm thinking of her. And Kathy Griffin used to tell jokes, though. She doesn't tell jokes anymore. She just whines and moans about Donald Trump and the Trump administration. It reminds me of that meme. I think the whole left has become this meme of Sandra Fluke. Do you know her, the left-wing activist? She's the girl, she's frowning, her arms are crossed, and says, that's not funny. That is the whole left right now. Jerry Seinfeld will no longer play college campuses. Why? He says that the students are too politically correct, by which he means humorless and left-wing. The left can't laugh because it has no sense of proportion, it has no sense of history, and it has no sense of humor. Again, I'm a little bit older than you, so I remember when George W. Bush was Hitler. I know that you're confused because now Donald Trump is Hitler. And actually, in the 80s, Ronald Reagan was Hitler. Now, Brett Kavanaugh is a vicious criminal gang rapist. Soon we're going to learn that Ted Cruz is the Zodiac Killer. That is the state of discourse on the left. And there's a really important lesson here, which is that if you marry yourself to the spirit of the age, you will find yourself a widow in the next age. If you say, I thought George Bush was Hitler, you say, no, that was 2003, man. Get with the stick, man. Trump is Hitler now. Kavanaugh's a criminal. Okay, right. It's so exhausting. How exhausting must that be? How tedious. How awful never to laugh, always to be outraged, or at least to pretend to be outraged. There was a comedy special on Netflix, just came out, called Nanette. And this comedy special, what made it unique is that it wasn't comedy. The girl got out on stage in her comedy special, and she said, I am not going to tell jokes, I am just going to explain all of the awful traumas that I've endured in my life. If she's watching this, just a word of it, there is a word for that, which is not comedy, it's tragedy. That's not comedy. But they have redefined comedy on the left to mean not comedy. This is truly political correctness run amok, the perversion of language taken to its logical conclusion. And the left can't laugh because the left can't think. Horace Walpole, the great English writer, said, life is a comedy to the man who thinks, and a tragedy to the man who feels. This was an early British version of facts don't care about your feelings. We have narrowed it down now and made it pithier. If you are a slave to your emotions and passions, you're not going to have a very good time. We conservatives know that life is a comedy. Like Dante understood, life is a comedy. It has a happy ending. Life works out. For the left, though, life is a sick joke. It's not really worth protecting. It's not really worth caring about. This is why the left is so flippant. It's so cavalier about snuffing out life. It's why they've taken the sacramental view of abortion and now doctor-assisted suicide. They're so enthusiastic about it because they don't see the value in life. They don't see the comedy of it all. So the left doesn't take life very seriously, but the left does take itself very seriously. It exaggerates every single issue. Kavanaugh is the great example of this. Can you think of a more milquetoast individual in the country other than Mitt Romney? I'll give you Mitt Romney. But other than Mitt Romney, can you think of one? No, of course not. This guy, I was listening to an interview with John Yoo, who was a friend of his at Yale Law School. He said, I know where the bodies are buried for Kavanaugh, and the answer is nowhere because he's been running for the Supreme Court since the day he was born. And yet they're turning this guy, someone, that creepy porn lawyer that represents Stormy Daniels, they're calling him a gang rapist. They're saying that he ran a criminal gang rape syndicate. I don't even know it's such an absurd accusation. They take everything to such an exaggeration, and they can't have that proportion. Chesterton observed that the angels can fly because they can take themselves lightly. The left can't take itself lightly. It's just lands with a thud. The left can't take itself lightly, and this is why the left has embraced, as a virtue, pride. It loves the virtue of pride. Now, we're at a Catholic university. We know that pride is not a virtue. Some might say it's the queen of all sins. It's the worst possible sin imaginable. Caused Satan to fall like lightning from heaven, caused Adam to fall out of the garden. It's a very bad sin. The left has embraced pride, though, as a virtue. And I'm not just singling out gay people. It's embraced pride on thin pride, fat pride, certain racial pride. It's certainly not white pride, but other racial prides. Pride, and it embraces pride because pride says that we are sufficient. We're good enough just the way that we are. If we're not perfect, we're at least perfectible just the way that we are, and we have nothing to gain from anybody, certainly not from those pesky conservatives. This brings us to another L, another simple joy being right, which is listening. When you're a conservative, you get to listen, and that's very nice. Why would you want to listen? You don't know everything, certainly, because other people are different than you. They have different points of view, different experiences in life. It's nice to hear different viewpoints. As Carlyle wrote, he said, every man is my superior in that I can learn from that man. Absolutely right. But the left doesn't feel this way. The left refuses to listen. How many speeches have we seen, particularly by conservative speakers, where the lefty students with some crazy colored hair and who knows what, they stand up and they start screaming, or they interrupt, or they block the door. They won't let people get in, or they pull a fire alarm, or they have banners, or they attack, or whatever. This is assuming that the conservative can get on campus at all in the first place. How many times have we seen speakers disinvited from campuses? Major speakers, Condoleezza Rice, big serious people, because the left will not tolerate different points of view. Look at big tech. Big tech right now is censoring conservatives. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. They censor my show. It happens frequently. They kick people off. They unverify people on Twitter. This is the weirdest one. On Twitter, there's a little blue check mark if you're verified, and it means you are who you are. But now, if they don't like you, they take it away, which I guess means that you are no longer who you are. You have changed. You are trans. You have become trans in your identity. The left is very threatened by free speech. They're threatened by free speech. They won't allow the open exchange of ideas, and I think that's because deep down they are not very confident in their own views. I think deep down at a subconscious level they suspect that their views do not really line up with reality. And this brings us to our third L, simple joy of being right, which is looking. When you're a conservative, you get to look around the world and accept what you see. This is a very important lesson in life. Nobody sees the world with perfect clarity. We all bring our own ideas and our own prejudices, and sure, that's true. The left brings something else, or it at least brings something else to a greater extent, which is ideology. Ideology, the rationalizing of the world, the narrowing of the world, the codifying into doctrine of the world so that you can say, okay, this is the world. I've got it on a piece of paper. That's the world now. Conservatives, in general, broadly, try to eschew ideology. They prefer the real to the theoretical. Again, don't take my word for it. It might sound like I'm being hyperbolic or something. The Democrats boast about this. One of the most famous speeches ever given by a Democrat politician, it is constantly referenced and echoed today, was RFK, Robert Kennedy, in 1968. And he said, "Some people see things that are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask, why not?" And this was supposed to be some profound statement, and a lot of politicians copy it. Robert Kennedy thought that he was quoting George Bernard Shaw there, the great lefty playwright, which is true, he was. I think what Kennedy he didn't read the whole play, so he didn't realize that when Shaw wrote those words, he put them into the mouth of the serpent tempting Eve. He was literally reciting the words of the devil, you know. Leave it to a Kennedy. Leave it to a Kennedy. I'll put this into political terms, in terms that we see all around us. By all accounts, things are going very well. The economy is booming. There's relative peace. Wages are increasing. Spiritually, liberty is expanding. Materially, we're prospering as we have never prospered before. So is that how the left sees it? No, it is not. According to the left, they see Nazi, Russian rapist spies everywhere. In the administration, all ducking out of corners with Boris and Natasha. They see it everywhere. Why is that? It's because they impose their ideology on the world around them. They impose their ideology on what they see. This brings us to another L, which is learning. Ideology discourages learning. Why does it discourage learning? Well, if you have all the answers, why do you need to learn anything? You know it all. You've got the answer. For the left, politics and history are a science. They're not an art. They're not a set of circumstances that are constantly changing. It's a science. If you figure out the formula, you just got to figure it out on paper, then that is the way it will be forever. There's a right side to history, a wrong side to history, and then sometimes we pesky conservatives interfere with their history. They see the future, and it works, to quote communists in the early 20th century. And we stand athwart history yelling, stop. This is why the left is shocked when they lose elections. They're shocked. They turn hysterical when they lose elections, because they were supposed to win. Don't you know? Didn't you get the memo? In 2000, Al Gore was supposed to win. He was supposed to be the president. In 2016, don't get me started on 2016. Oh, in 2016, she was supposed to win. All the political scientists told us she was going to win. What's the matter? So when she didn't win, when she didn't win, that deserves a round of applause. So when Hillary didn't win, you and I, we could be here all night doing that. Do it again. All right, do it again. All right. So when Hillary didn't win, she... All right, stop it. When she didn't win, she lost it. She lost it. It couldn't possibly be because she didn't win. It couldn't be. Do you know whose fault it was? It was the Macedonians. It was the Russians. It was Comey. It was really Donald Trump is the guy who beat her. The only answer that she could not land on, the only one that the ideological Democrats could not accept, was that the American people, those deplorable, irredeemable American people, did not vote for her, that she lost fair and square. They couldn't accept that. And this gets us, those deplorables, gets us to another L, which is love. Conservatives love our countrymen, even Hillary Clinton. Sometimes. Well, you know, kind of children of God, I don't know. We kind of like her. We'll pray for her. Let's pray for her. We love our countrymen, though. We love our countrymen because we love our country. We love our country. We love our traditions. We love the people. We love the restaurants down the street. We like the museum. We like the Lions Club. We just love our country. The left doesn't love our country. I'm sorry to say that, but they don't. And my evidence for this is they, at this moment, are literally protesting the country. They are getting down on one knee and protesting the American flag, the Star-Spangled Banner, which is a symbol of the country. The purpose of a flag is to represent your country. Some people insist they're not really protesting the flag. I say, well, no, they are. I'm seeing them protest the flag right now. I see it happening. They say, no, they're protesting police brutality. They're protesting police brutality. If they were protesting police brutality, they could protest a police department or the color blue. I don't know. They say, no, they're protesting this Trump. Well, okay, then go protest Trump, but they're not. They're protesting the flag, which is the symbol of the country. And it's ironic because they use this phrase now, love trumps hate. Have you heard love trumps hate? Which sounds like a pro-Trump saying, doesn't it? It doesn't sound like it's anti-Trump. Anyway, so they say love trumps hate. They want to say that they are the loving ones and we awful conservatives are the hateful ones. So they talk about love, love and tolerance in 1 minute, and then the next minute, their elected leaders, Maxine Waters, others, are saying, go, whenever you see a conservative, harass them, chase them out of restaurants, chase them out of the public square, go to their homes, where their children sleep, scream, knock on the door, harass them. The left constantly impugns our character, constantly impugns our intentions. Why is this? It's because the left loves humanity, but it doesn't like humans very much. It doesn't like the real people that it meets. This is baked into left-wing ideology. It's built into progressivism. Progressives are progressing toward utopia. They progress. They're progressing towards something. They've got a clear vision. They're going toward it. If you really believed that you see the good, you see the utopia, the perfect place on earth, and then some guy gets in your way, there are only two explanations for why he would get in your way. One, he is profoundly stupid and doesn't see what that is. And two, he's evil. He has bad intentions. He wants to hurt people. He's malevolent. Those are the only options for the progressive to view the conservative. And for smart conservatives, there's only one option. It's not that you're stupid. If you can articulate any words, then you're not. Then you're a smart guy, and that means that you're an evil person. It's why they malign our intentions so much. Conservatives are not progressives. We know that there's no utopia. We know that, utopia literally means no place. Some people think that it means the best place. It doesn't mean the best place. It means no place. It doesn't exist on earth. We have been kicked out of the garden. We're not going back. There will not be perfection on earth. There will be war and blood and suffering for all of this age until the end of the age. And this allows us to get to our next L, which is letting the world be as it is, our penultimate L. So when reality foils the left's grandiose plans, we get to go back to the first L and we can laugh at them, because it always foils their grandiose plans. We would be in good company laughing at them. There's a wonderful old Yiddish expression, man plans, God laughs. It always foils those plans. Every grandiose plan for utopia fails. From the workers' paradise of the Soviet Empire, to the racially pure fantasy of Nazi Germany, to the socialist hell of Venezuela and other places on earth. It always fails. Inevitably, utopian schemes will fail. The imperfection of the world is an offense to leftists, who are proud and who believe that man deserves perfection here and now. For the conservative, though, our take is, it is what it is. It's one of my favorite truisms. It is what it is. It is what it is. We appreciate the world as it is. In fact, we even kind of like it. It's our world. Okay, we like it. We're going someplace else, but well, we're here, that'll be just fine. Michael Oakeshott put all of this very well in his book, Rationalism and Politics, in his essay on being conservative. He wrote, quote, "To be conservative is to prefer the familiar to the unknown, to prefer the tried to the untried, fact to mystery, the actual to the possible, the limited to the unbounded, the near to the distant, the sufficient to the superabundant, the convenient to the perfect, present laughter to utopian bliss. Familiar relationships and loyalties will be preferred to the allure of more profitable attachments. To acquire and to enlarge will be less important than to keep, to cultivate, and to enjoy. Conservatives enjoy. We enjoy many things. It's very nice. We enjoy our friends and our country and our church and our attachments. We enjoy all of those things. We don't want to fundamentally transform those things. You don't want to fundamentally transform things that you love, Barack. You don't want to do that, Barack. And this brings us to our final L, limiting our demands on this life. The other L for this could be lower your expectations, which is also good advice. It'll also help you live a nicer life. The left has utopian expectations. Sometimes I think that the left doesn't know that they're going to die, that no one here gets out alive, that they're not going to be around here forever. Those people in Silicon Valley, those lefty futurists, they say they're this close to finding the cure to death. How many pharaohs said the same thing? We're this close, we're going to cure death. Okay, guys. The other lefties, the kind of civilian lefties, manifest this in their neurotic health obsessions. You know, the kale and the veganism and the whatever. I don't even know what avocado toast? Who knows? Conservatives are not like that. Conservatives eat red meat. The redder, the better. We drink, we smoke cigars. Maybe I'm just describing myself, but I think others are like me too. By limiting our demands on life, by not trying to extend this life here forever and ever and ever and make it a utopia on earth, we're able to enjoy life. Limiting the demands on life. This finally brings us to the conservative political agenda. Put bluntly, in America, conservatives want limited government. Why is that? There are a lot of reasons. One, overregulation, God bless, overregulation hampers economic growth. Because the bigger the government gets, the smaller the citizen gets, because a government big enough to give you everything that you want is big enough to take away everything that you've got, because the government's not very efficient, because the government wastes a lot of money, because there's very little recourse against the government. Sure, all reasons, one above all of them. The government workers are just like you and me. They're flawed, they're imperfect. Maybe not Brett Kavanaugh, I think that guy's pretty squeaky, but most of them are flawed like you and me. They're not gods. The left always wants experts. They seem to think that if we just got all the experts, all the technical experts in every field, and we put them in charge of public policy, life would be tickety-boo. You always hear this with global warming, they say, or global cooling, or whatever the new one is, the global climate, whatever. The euphemism is this week. They say if we just get that guy in charge of public policy, in charge of environmental policy or energy policy, then it'll all be great. That guy is the last person you would ever want to put in charge of policy, especially environmental policy. Because while he might know something about meteorology or geology, very often those people know nothing about anything else, nothing about how that narrow field, that narrow ideology fits into the broader scope of public life, politically, economically, or philosophically. Limited government means one more L, which is liberty. The simple joys of being right cannot exist without that. Liberty is a central fact of our lives. God created man free. He gave us will. He gave us freedom to exercise our will. And so we are free to choose how we will live, wrong or right. Thank you very much. Oh, stop it. You're too kind. Get out of here. Hillary lost. All right, I think we're doing questions. Is that right? Okay.
All right, so if anyone has any questions, you can go and form a line in the back. And we'll have you stand there, and we'll have everyone come up one at a time. Please have one question ready to go. And I'll hold the mic for you when you ask the question, and once your question has been answered, you can just make your way back down the aisle and back to your seat.
Where do I get your tank top?
I'll let you take a picture with me afterwards if you want.
I'm in.
So, regarding the recent things with InfoWars and being banned, a lot of the power of the internet is controlled by Silicon Valley, which is extremely leftist. And he was banned just in a sort of window from a bunch of different platforms and now recently PayPal. So my question is, what sort of recourse is there? Because I could say, dang, YouTube, stop demonetizing things, but I'm still going to watch YouTube videos till 2 a.m. in the morning. There's just not a lot of other ways to do that. So do you think, one, that those things should be considered public spaces in regards to any legislation that passed them? And what sort of conservative, not backlash, but recourse do we have in regards to something like that?
It's a very tricky issue because we don't want to bring in the big fat hand of the state and regulate them and then leave us vulnerable to the government regulating us when we have a shot at it all. But likewise, we can't let them keep doing what they're doing. What they're doing is awful. The reason it's awful is because it's dishonest. They are not transparent. They are not playing fairly. If they came out and said we're left-wing platforms, actually the head of Twitter sort of alluded to this last week. If they came out and said we're left-wing platforms, we could say, all right, see you later, and we could go start our own platforms. But they don't do that. They say, oh, we're fair. No, we're fair. Bye-bye, Alex Jones. Sorry, the frogs are going to get gayer. Bye-bye. They are. And they are. They're getting, you know. So what we have to do, I believe, is threaten them with legislation. We should threaten them with, they're not playing by the rules. So either they're a publisher or they're an open platform. If they're an open platform, good, that sounds great. If they're a publisher, which is curating content, which they're already doing, we know that they're doing it to the benefit of the left, and they're harming the right, then we need to threaten to regulate them as publishers, which opens them up to a lot of legal trouble with regard to intellectual property and copyright, and we should burn them down to the ground. Or they can play fair. I'm not saying they need to become conservative. I'm not saying they even need to be centrist. I want them to be honest. And if they're not going to be honest, then let's do it, man. Light it up. Yeah.
Okay, so we know, like, everyone, a lot of people know about, like, there's the whole, like, fake news thing, like CNN, CNN, like NBC.
Yeah, it's been fake news for like 30 years.
Exactly. So, like, I read Daily Wire, I listen to Rush. Like, can you tell me, like, more, I guess, like, true, like, news stations to, like, get my news from? Because, like, I don't know, it's like hard these days, obviously.
It's very hard. You have to read a variety of sources. So I still read the Wall Street Journal every day. The Wall Street Journal is still basically good. Their reporting is a little left-wing. Obviously, the editorial board is kind of business right. They're not, they're not cultural warriors, but they're basically fair brokers. Financial Times leans left, but they're okay. The Economist has kind of gone downhill. The Atlantic is almost impossible to read. I only read Caitlin Flanagan now. Everyone else is insane over there. So what I would do then is, unfortunately, I hate to tell you this, I'm going to subject you to misery and masochism, but you should read Vox.com. You should read, just to laugh at them. They're not serious people. They're not serious people. They're total hacks. But you can at least get the perspective of the talking points that they are trying to put forward. And it will give you a balanced idea of where the partisans fall, and then you can refute them. One of the great benefits, I've always been in very left-wing places, New York, LA, Yale. One of the great benefits of that is you really sharpen your arguments, or you change your mind in some cases, but you really have to be exposed to what they're talking about, or else they're going to blindside you. So I wish I could recommend some great, wonderful centrist or left-wing news source, but then that would be fake news, wouldn't it? That would be fake news that I would be spreading. Thanks.
So I went to a pretty liberal high school. I come from Minnesota, which is a little bit
Don't you know? Yep.
a little bit blue.
Slightly, yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit. But I've met a lot of people that don't know what they're talking about, especially in terms of gun control. So, like, how do we debate people and, like, talk to people that honestly don't know what they're talking about and, like, have, like, and ask for quote-unquote sensible gun control?
Treat them like children. I mean that. Treat them. That's not to say torture them or be mean. You don't want to start beating your child. That's not a good parent. You have to treat them like children because they don't know anything. Children don't know anything. Maybe it's not their fault, you know. In the case of kids, it's not. In grown adult lefties, maybe it is their fault. But they either have an impoverished education or they're not terribly curious. So you should treat them like children. A firm hand, don't back down, you have the authority, but be kind and charitable and try to bring them up to your reasonable point of view. Unless they're totally far gone and they're like blue-haired, screeching crazies, maybe that isn't going to work. But if they're like a lot of people who are just vaguely culturally leftist because our culture is left-wing, I think that you could convince them, but you've got to be firm and confident and know what you're talking about and kind.
Hi, Michael. I wanted to just turn to our good buddy G.K. Chesterton. He said, "The business of progressives is to go on making mistakes. The business of conservatives is to prevent mistakes from being corrected."
Yeah.
In light of that, we talked a lot about, a lot of the good things for conservatism tonight, but do you think there's certain mistakes today that the conservative movement needs to worry about preventing from being corrected?
Yes, specifically today, they didn't vote on Brett Kavanaugh, which they should have done. It's a disgrace that they've let this go on. It's a national disgrace, and it's a circus. I've got to tell you, if you look at, because a lot of this is on judiciary, but if you look at the Trump era, you'll know that we're living in the Matrix when Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham are the toughest dealers in the Republican caucus. They're like tough as nails, those guys. Who could have ever guessed? That's one area. The conservatives should not be so conciliatory. They should not cede, especially cultural ground. The quote from Chesterton is great because it's using conservatism in the really, really narrow sense of just keeping the tidewater back as long as you can. But we should punch back. We should fight back. We can do it. The culture's on our side. The election of President Trump showed us this. The advent of the new media, before all of the tech companies tried to censor us, showed us that. For decades and decades, the mainstream media had a monopoly on information. And we were all just convinced, I guess, our whole country is crazy and left-wing. But the minute that you get a little freedom in there, freedom of information, freedom of behavior, you see that that is not the case. I think the American people are on our side, broadly. And I think we should fight and push hard because if the election of Donald Trump has shown us anything, it's that conservatives should never say never. And there aren't many things that are impossible if we do our homework and fight hard and fight for things that are good things for the American people that will make us safer, richer, more prosperous, and having a sane policy abroad. I think we can do it, but you've got to metal up like Lindsey, baby, like Lindsey found his spine. All right. Thanks.
I'm a computer science or computer information science major. What can people getting into computers do to help the conservative movement?
Tweet. You should tweet. I am a Russian bot, so I don't know if you're a Russian bot too, but we could tweet. That would be a great idea. It's very difficult, the place that you're in. Very often I get questions from people in show business who say, should I tell people in show business that I'm conservative? To which I say, probably not if you want to work. Google showed us that that's probably the same in tech. My friends who were at tech largely are left-wing. Those are not hospitable places. Jack Dorsey, for all intents and purposes, admitted that he has a leftist culture. Google fired James Damore. One question you'll have to ask yourself as you get along in your career is, should you be open and public and publicize your views, or should you lay a little bit lower? I can't answer that. You probably know the answer to that better than I do. But I've been very open with my views. It's probably cost me professionally in certain areas, but I don't really mind it. But if you want to actually work in that field, you might have to play a longer game. Be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. Unfortunately, today we have a lot of people who are innocent as serpents and wise as doves, but you should do the opposite. And I wish you luck. And if you do make your way in there, please stop censoring my show. Stop it, man. Get them to let my show air, all right?
What's your opinion on the lack of action or deflection by the Pope on the recent scandal in the church?
Ooh. Far be it from me to criticize the Holy Father. The Pope, a few years, I think it was a couple years ago, it's certainly in recent memory, was asked about we conservative young Catholics. And he said, all those young people, they're too rigid. Oh, they're too rigid. They should stop being so rigid. You know, Catholics who prefer the extraordinary form or older liturgies or older traditions. He recently said that homilies should not be 40 minutes long. They should be 8 minutes long, no more than 8 minutes. The whole Mass should be 40 minutes long. I suppose it depends on who is celebrating the Mass. You know, this Pope talks and talks about transparency. He talks about how we need to end clericalism. And yet what happened when Archbishop Vigano, a respected figure with nothing to gain, publicly revealed his testimony and accused the Pope of being complicit in covering up some of the sins of former Cardinal McCarrick? What happened? He said, shut up. 2 words. He said, shut up. He didn't use it, and he said it in his nice Papa Francesco way, but he said, well, what is needed now is silence. Worse yet, he blamed the exposure of truth on the devil. But the devil does not expose truth. The devil is the prince of lies. He speaks his native language. He's the father of lies. The truth is uncovered by the Holy Spirit. So there's a lot of confusion. There's been a lot of confusion for a very long time. And I really hope and pray that the Holy Father would take his own advice. The Holy Father has said that bishops can resign, that popes can resign. I don't know. I'm no expert on that. But I wish that the difference between what the Pope says and how the Pope behaves, and some of what the Pope says and millennia of doctrine and tradition, I wish that they were a little bit closer, and perhaps one shouldn't project. Perhaps some of that reflection should fall on the Holy Father himself.
So I'm not sure how well you know the work of Patrick Deneen and some of these other people who've kind of espoused this idea of illiberalism and this movement on the right, kind of against classical liberalism and the reaction of classical liberals on the right against that. I was wondering if you could speak to that divide and if that's something we should look for, and is there a room for people who have this kind of illiberal view of democracy on the right?
Certainly. I quoted someone tonight who probably wouldn't call himself a liberal, he'd call himself a conservative, and that's Michael Oakeshott. And he's been pushed to the fringes of education. Very few young conservatives read him today, in part because he writes very British, so it just goes on, and it's really hard to track the sentence. But in part because what counts for the conservative movement, conservatism today, has basically become all liberalism. And that's a shame, because there is another school of thought. There are other schools of thought. An excellent book I would recommend is by my friend Yoram Hazani, called The Virtue of Nationalism. Yoram comes from the conservative wing of the conservative movement. So when I talk to young conservatives, or even old conservatives, they'll say, I'm so conservative that I'm a liberal. I'm a conservative because I'm a liberal. But there is a tradition that goes back further. Our political traditions and history did not begin 300 years ago. They go back much further than that. And I think finally that is being heard. I think the liberals, lowercase l, had a monopoly on that discourse for a long time, and I think that's breaking right now. I think actually part of the Trump phenomenon is breaking that a little bit. I don't know what Donald Trump thinks ideologically, but I think the fact of his election is speaking to that. There is much more to conservative thought. Oakeshott, to use that example, defines ideology as the formalized abridgment of the supposed substratum of rational truth contained in the tradition. A lot of classical liberals could be guilty of that ideology. And I think that we should focus on that last part, the tradition. There are institutions, there are traditions that we inherit, that we cannot formalize, that we can't write in a book, that we can't put in a doctrine or a manifesto. Those are worthwhile, those have endured. They're not the oldest thing in the world, they're the newest thing in the world, because they've made it through all of the lashings of history. We should revisit that, and conservatism, and the conservative wing of the conservative movement, that's not a dirty word, that's not a bad thing. There are bad ideas that can be espoused out of that, just as there are bad ideas that can be espoused out of liberalism. But it's a wonderful thing that that's broken up and that we can start exploring those ideas again.
I wrote it down. So. You believe that we should settle and be happy with what we have. Yet those that settle are usually those in a better situation. Countries that colonized were happy with how life was, but colonies clearly weren't. They wanted a revolution. Slavers were happy with reality, slaves weren't. Men that could vote many times were happy with how reality was, but women weren't. The same with segregation. Black men were not happy with the situation, but most white people were. So it usually is that those most oppressed and those that don't have the same benefits are more liberal, or those that feel that someone else should have the same benefits that they have, they're usually more liberal. So why do you say we should settle? Do you
I
believe
don't think
the
I
world
told
is great?
anybody to settle. I don't think so. I'm an ambitious fellow. I think that you're all ambitious people too. And I believe I concluded my speech by talking about the liberty that undergirds all of those simple joys of being right, because God made man free. And that's the essential fact of our lives, which is why when one does not have liberty, when one is enslaved, it's unnatural. It's unnatural to the human condition. I would never tell anybody to settle, but I would say that you should deal in the world as it is. For example, to take any of your examples, if you're in some horrific, oppressive state, let's use the example of North Korea, you're not going to overthrow that state by living in a fantasy, by pretending that the world is different than it is. You're not going to get very far at all. But if you accept the world as it is, perhaps you can get out of there. Perhaps you can push on the levers of the policy of other governments. I've spoken on my show to Ji Sung-ho. He's the North Korean defector who at the State of the Union held his crutches up into the air and said, yeah, you know, he's this unbelievable guy, lost limbs in oppression in North Korea, couldn't eat for days at a time. His family died of starvation. He made it across into China, tracked thousands of miles. Now he advocates on behalf of dissidents. If that man had simply said, well, I don't like things the way they are, and I'm going to pretend that it's otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to do that. One has to gird yourself with reality, ballast yourself with reality, and then do what you like. There's nothing about that that says one should tolerate some awful situation, but you won't get out of that situation if you live in a fantasy.
Hey, Michael. So say Trump calls you and says, you're my top immigration advisor. What do we do now? What would you say back?
This is very hard. I'd say, hey, man, thanks for endorsing the book. I appreciate it. We haven't talked since then. I've got 3 words. Do you know what those 3 words are going to be? Build the wall. Oh, yeah, you know. Hillary lost. Hey! Build the wall. Build the wall. He's done great on immigration. He has done great. He's done great for a few reasons. One, because it's a good policy, what he's doing, actually enforcing the law, getting criminals out, you know, hopefully discouraging people from breaking the law coming in. A terrible system which imperils both the people who do it and our own country, undermines our sovereignty, exposes particularly women and girls to horrific experiences crossing that border illegally. So it's a great policy in itself. It's also great because he's enforcing the law. So it exposes Democrats as utterly lawless. They're saying we can't separate children from their mothers. Well, that's not our fault. That law was on the books during the administration of Hillary Clinton's husband. She was present for that, for the Flores Agreement in 1997. Bill Clinton was the president. This is nothing new. We're just enforcing the law. That is wonderful. He's done a great job, and he's been really firm, and he won't allow them to demagogue it. But you campaign on Build the Wall. The American people improbably elect you president. No political experience whatsoever, mostly because you would go to places and you'd say, build a wall, and everyone would say, exactly. Build the wall! Build the wall! What are you doing? That's like a sure way to get reelected. So I hope he does it. And I hope he listened. Are you listening, Mr. President? Sometimes I go on Fox and Friends, which I refer to as my breakfast with the president. So maybe then I'll say, Mr. President, build the wall. I hope he does it.
Hey, it's a tragedy that your reversion came after you graduated Yale because you missed out on an amazing parish there. But
St. Thomas More?
No, St. Mary's.
St. Mary's is
the Dominicans,
like the tradition. Yeah. St. Thomas More was right next to where I lived.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't go very many times. But.
Okay, so I guess my question is, I guess for the bulk of our country's history, Catholics and evangelicals have pretty much always been opposed. And in the past 40 years, ever since Roe versus Wade specifically, we've begun to become more and more combined. It's almost like a Christian coalition, so to speak. But aside from the issue of abortion, there still is a very strict dividing line, especially the issues of contraception, the death penalty is becoming a larger dividing point. I guess what I'm wondering is, if we do see Roe versus Wade overturned in the next 6 to 8 years, do you think this coalition, so to speak, is going to continue into the future, or do you see the division increasing again?
I certainly hope it does, because in so many ways the evangelicals have it right and the Catholics in America have it wrong. Something like 51%, I think, of white evangelicals attend church regularly, and the number for black evangelicals is slightly lower. The number for Catholics is 25%, I think, something like that. It's even obviously it's lower for the mainline Protestants. That's like a tea club at this point. Same with abortion. Half of American Catholics support abortion. That's not very good numbers. So I certainly hope that coalition doesn't break up. As for the death penalty, it has always been the case that there has been legitimate disagreement among Catholics on the legitimacy of the death penalty, or on on the practice of the death penalty, not on the legitimacy of the death penalty. And our present Holy Father seems to be dangerously close to contradicting 2 millennia of church teaching, including the teachings of St. Paul and many others. So I would hope that his recent changes to the catechism are not permanent and are not intended to imply that the death penalty is intrinsically evil, which it is not. Many popes have killed many people, and it was perfectly right. I forget which pope it is, so I won't name him, but it was one of the popes at the end of the Papal States. It was finally, they were losing the territories, and a criminal who was to be executed asked for a reprieve. He said, "I cannot and I don't want to give you a reprieve." That's perfectly fine. That's my opinion on the death penalty. And so but I hope American Catholics get serious. I will leave you with a little hope on that question, which is that when you go to a Latin Mass or an extraordinary form, the pews are full. These are people who are practicing their faith. There is a father and a mother and kids. But I went to another church the other day. It was a little more loosey-goosey, and I showed up late. You know, I can't get too much on my high horse, and I try to sneak into a pew, and I look, and there's a giant German shepherd in the pew. No kids. And then I look, there's a little yappy dog starts barking at me. Those are not kids. Those are animals. That does not make a lot of sense. They've got things upside down. But I find those churches are emptying out. People don't go there for the acoustic guitars and all of that kind of stuff. I think people want robust and serious religion, sober liturgy, especially among those young, rigid people that the Holy Father has talked about. And so that gives me a little bit of hope for the future. The trouble that we're going to face is that the largest religious group among millennials are the religiously not affiliated. One hopes that this is just because they were raised without religion and that they can have a reversion or a conversion and go back to true religion as they grow older. But that's going to be a fight that we need allies in, and I think the evangelicals have been tremendous allies so far. Unfortunately, I don't think Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned soon, but if it is, I hope that coalition continues.
All right, and this will be our final question for the night.
You better make it good.
All right. Hi. I had a question regarding the government programs of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So there's been research into how in the next several years those programs are no longer going to be able to be supported by the current tax dollars by the American people. And eventually, either the government's going to have to increase taxes somehow to pay for it. And I was wondering, since this is an issue that as young Americans we're going to have to be dealing with in the future, do you believe that this idea of these big social programs by the government is so ingrained that people are going to just keep it around, or do you think that the American people are going to be able to, I guess, promote a way to get rid of them or something like that?
No, I think they're here to stay. I'm sort of sorry to say. And there's something conservative about reforming, evolution, not revolution. Not everything needs to be obliterated and built up from scratch again. You can try to reform certain things. Unfortunately, this is the great failure of Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan was so wonderful on this. 8 years ago now. He showed a lot of guts, a lot of political courage. He took on the third rail. He tried to reform Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, the largest driver of debt, the biggest portion of our budget. And he failed. He failed at it, and that's sad. I wish he had succeeded. I think there were moments when it was more plausible than others, and it still just didn't work out. So eventually, at the present rate, those security net programs will not be around for us. But what will happen is, I hope instead of raising taxes, we just, for people under a certain age, which means you and me, I'm sorry to say, we just lower the benefits. We change the way that people contribute to these programs and the way that you get benefits out of them as well. It's kind of sad, but somebody's got to take responsibility, and if older generations won't, then we have to do it. This, of course, does not mean we throw Granny off a cliff. You can't throw Granny off a cliff, and we wouldn't want to even if we could. So we will just have to take responsibility for ourselves. And this is frustrating because there's been a lot of debt foisted on the millennial generation, and it's not fair, and it's not right, but on the flip side of that, the culture has gotten so loose and reckless, particularly the millennial generation, that a little bit of responsibility and a little unfairness probably will do them some good. Landing at Normandy wasn't fair for a generation earlier. We can at least deal with tightening our belts a little and getting fewer handouts from the government. So I'm hoping that hopefully that painful experience will help reform the character of our generation as well. All right, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet you.